Very warm welcome to all of you today. It's fantastic to have you join us for this webinar. I think we have a record turnout today. I think this is the most we've ever had at one of our sessions. And I think as I work it out, I think there's about 14 different countries here. So from Finland to Denmark to Gibraltar to Spain to the UK, many of the Indian Ocean islands, as far as Singapore, Indonesia, Switzerland. Just fantastic to have people from all over the world joining us together. And I think the topic today is probably got a lot to do with it, and particularly the speaker. For those who I have not met, my name is Pete Leyburn, and I have the joy of having worked with Steve closely over the last 9 years for the time that Steve has been one of our associates with the Lead with Humanity team. I'm hugely excited about today, not just to hear Steve talk, but this book has been some time in the making. I think all of us who know Steve, which I'm going to hazard a guess is pretty much just about everybody here, would have either met Steve online or had the privilege of have a session run by Steve that you've participated in. We all know Steve as being an extraordinarily humble person, warm, extraordinarily engaging, and extremely caring for each one of the delegates when he's facilitating a program. An extraordinary connector who epitomizes everything that we at Lead with Humanity endeavor to share with our delegates. He creates energy and enthusiasm wherever he is, and I'm sure you'll all attest to that. But he does have a unique gift, and that unique gift is to observe and to see beyond the obvious, and an extraordinary talent and ability to write and capture more than just a story, but situations, both in his writing and in his poetry. And any of you who've been on any Leading with Humanity program with us will know that without us even knowing, he's captured the whole program in prose by the end of the week. Just an extraordinary ability. But I think it's because his ability to capture far more than just the story. He really can paint a picture and a story of what's going on behind the obvious. That is a unique talent. And really, this long-awaited book with the most appropriate title of Another Set of Lenses is just a true testimony to what Steve has done for many years. And I know some of you may have already had a sneak ability, those of you in Europe who can get access to a copy of the book in hardcover. I think there's one in South Africa at the moment, and that's in Steve's hand. But we are hugely excited about this. We're going to do today slightly different. Normally, we would invite our guest speaker to speak into breakout sessions, but today, because it's Steve, we're just saying, Steve, you just keep talking. You run the session today. Those of you who would like to ask some questions, please just put them in the chat box as we go along. If you do have any questions, I'm sure Steve will allow some time for some questions or observations. But Steve, we're in your hands, and we are just so excited about the book, so excited to see everybody here and to hear about Another Set of Lenses.
Sure. Thank you, Pete. What a humbling introduction, and just to see people coming in from all over the world today is just a true honor and a great privilege to spend some time with you. Thank you for giving up some of your precious time to come and listen in on perhaps a journey that I've been on this book. It really is remarkable to see so many faces from all over this place, all over South Africa, all over the Indian Ocean, all over Indonesia, Singapore, Gibraltar, Finland, Denmark, the UK. There may even be somebody on from Swaziland, I think, which is incredible. But really is extraordinary. And thank you for joining. You sometimes just can't script this stuff. You just can't script it, because literally an hour ago, the doorbell rang, and I was on the phone to Pete. And the doorbell was the arrival of my book. And it's the first copy in South Africa. And it's quite an extraordinary feeling to hold the book. It's wonderful to know it's on Amazon and LinkedIn, and it still seems very ethereal and quite esoteric. But the physical holding of the book has been quite an emotional moment, and it arrived literally 1 hour before this call. I don't even really know where to start, but in the book, I do start with a PS. And normally a PS is at the back of a book. It's a postscript. It's an afterthought. It's something that you think about after the fact. The PS starts, though, because in the world of golf, very often you hit a nervous first ball out of bounds. My nephew Sam on this call will know that feeling. And then you pop a second ball on the tee, and there's something about resignation, and you just surrender yourself, and you hit a beautiful flowing drive right down the middle. And it is always at that point where somebody in the covey pipes up. There's an ancient Chinese philosophy: hit second ball first. And so I used that philosophy with my book, and I thought, well, maybe I need to write my second book first, make the mistakes on the first book, and then write the second one. And in many ways, it kicked off my journey on writing the book. I think it was born out of a number of questions. There were questions that I've learned and heard many times over 27 odd years as a facilitator in leadership development and team effectiveness. And they were things like, how do we create more fully engaged employees in our business? How do we encourage more collaboration? How might we adopt an aura of more generosity and sharing? How do we get our teams to get involved in constant learning and growth? Maybe we need to learn more about integration and innovation. Maybe we need to understand more about relationship. And so these questions really got me thinking about what have been some responses from really ordinary people who live in an extraordinary way. How is it that some people look at these challenges and they overcome them because primarily they've looked through a different or another set of lenses? And so bear with me as I try and sort of share a screen here. I hope it does come up. That's kind of what the book looks like if you are ever able to get your hands on it. But a large part of my journey was spent working with the Covey Leadership Center. Stephen Covey wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And if there's one model that really stuck with me for the rest of my life, and any of you who've been on the Leading with Humanity program or on webinars with us at Lead with Humanity, will know this model very well. It starts with a very simple word called see. And it really thinks around, how do we see the world? What are the pictures in our minds? What are the paradigms or perceptions, our mindsets, our mental mind maps? How do we see the world? What are the pictures that come to mind? And on this call, there are some quite extraordinary people from Lux Hotels. And when you think about Indian Ocean Islands and Lux Hotels, there are pictures that come into our minds that we say we want to go there. We want to go and visit these incredible places with the most unbelievable hospitality. And these pictures are formed from past experiences or from perceptions or from the media. We often joke on our programs at Leading with Humanity that our view of America or of the ex-president, thankfully, Donald Trump, can depend on whether we watch CNN or Fox News. The media may inform our pictures of the world. The media may indeed give us a different lens through which to see. And of course, what evolves is that we do what we do because we see what we see. Very often our behaviors are related to the pictures we have. And we adopt a certain behavior because of a certain picture. Of course, when we do what we do, we often get a result. And we get what we get most often because we do what we do. And of course, there is between do and get this phenomena called luck or bad luck. Sometimes, Chad Patterson, you'll know this very well, that when you play golf, you hit a great shot, but you just hit a bad bounce and it bounces towards the rough. You did it well, but you got a bad outcome. It's called bad luck. Sometimes we do a great presentation. We just don't get the sale. And so we did it well. There was a bit of bad luck or bad timing, and we didn't get the outcome. But generally speaking, we get what we get because we do what we do. And where this completes the circle is when we get what we get, reinforces our picture. And Covey, of course, talks about habits. We adopt and develop the habits because of these interactions between what we see, what we do, and what we get. And I think I'd be the first one to admit that I've been guilty in the training and leadership space and development and workshops of concentrating primarily on trying to change behaviors. Even as a father with teenage children, we try our hardest to change behaviors. We concentrate on the do, tidy your room, cut your nails, wash your hair, go and shower, do this, go and eat, put your plates away in the sink. It's all behavior related. And very few of us spend time really examining, well, what's the picture that lies underneath the behavior? What is the picture we're seeing that causes the behavior? And if we can address both, then maybe we'll get more sustainable change. We'll get more sustainable outcomes. And so this led me on this journey in this book to what we called 6 pictures of the world. How do we see the world? And how I try to relate this is as if they are polarities. And so each one has an opposite. And they are like polarities. And to think of polarities, think about breathing. When we breathe, we have to breathe in and we have to breathe out. One is not correct and the other one is therefore wrong. Both live in harmony, in parallel, in polarity with each other. We can't go on a course and say, well, today we're only going to breathe in. Forget about breathing out. Breathing out allows us to release carbon dioxide. Breathing in allows us to reinvigorate our bodies with oxygen. And we have to do both. There isn't a place we sit forever that says, well, we're in the right place now when it comes to breathing. It's always how do we manage the balance of these polarities? We breathe differently. Some will breathe quicker, some will breathe slower. When I go diving for oysters later this afternoon, I will breathe very differently, but I will still need to breathe in and I will need to breathe out. They are opposite ends of a spectrum. And think of them as tightropes, because each of us need to find some degree of our balance along these tightropes. The only rule is you can't sit on the one side of the extremity. It's almost seemingly impossible. And so what emerged was one of them being on what I call a blue side, which is a blue view is around more connection, whereas a red view of the world is around a little more tension. It's not to say one is wrong and one is right. It's just, are we able to pick up another set of lenses and look at the world through those lenses? And therefore, we may get some different behaviors and some outcomes. It's seemingly a world where, are there multiple truths or are there single truths? And of course, the answer is always yes. Should we focus on our future? Should we live in the now? Yes. Should I concentrate on my career or should I follow my passion? Yes. Should we produce a cheap product? Should we produce a quality product? Yes. And so it constantly examines, are we on the side of multiple truths or are we sticking doggedly to a single truth? And at times there is a single truth, which may be that it is dangerous to swim in the easterly wind at St. Francis Bay with a 3-meter swell. single version of the truth. Multiple truths might say, well, are you well equipped for that? Have you got, do somebody know you're going swimming? There could be multiple truths. And in the book, I think one of the stories, and I'm so delighted, I think Jeff Thomas, Stombe Jongosi is with us on this call. And he really helped me understand from a more African perspective why it was that they had both this view of traditional healing where plants and even animal products could help them, but also they could look at Western medicine. And I was perplexed all the time walking through markets, and many of you on this call have walked with us through those very markets and saying, how is it possible that they can really believe that these plant products and these animal products may in fact help them? And the phrase he used, which helped me, which is Ukushaya and Gezinduku Izimbili. I hope I've got that right, Jeff. Ukushaya and Gezinduku Izimbili, which meant that we are fighting with two sticks. And what it purports to is that in the art, the martial art of Zulu stick fighting, a warrior was always armed with two sticks. And if one of their sticks was removed or knocked out of their hands, they were very vulnerable to attack. And so they had a stick for attack and a stick for defense. And what that meant for me in that moment was it meant we have two sticks with which to fight. We have multiple truths. We can perhaps look at the world through one lens of traditional medicines, which could work, but we can also look at the world through modern medicine, and therefore we increase our chances. And so this helped me to understand that maybe we live in a world that has multiple truths. And in the book are many stories of people, real people and examples that have looked at the world through a multiple truth set of lenses. Is it possible that it's a single truth sometimes? Of course. But maybe we might get different outcomes if we look at it through multiple truths. It could lead us from a world of red tension to a world of more blue connection. A second picture of the world really looked at, is the world an infinite place, or is the world a finite place, a linear place, a place where there's only enough resource just for a few? Of course, again, the answer is yes. Sometimes it is finite and sometimes it is infinite. Simon Sinek has written a magnificent book called Infinite Players, I think, or Infinite Games. And he was inspired by the writing of a man called James P. Cass, who in 1986 wrote a book called Finite and Infinite Games. And it really looks at the game through different set of lenses. Are we seeing the world as finite? There's only a little bit enough, so therefore our do is we must fight for what we can get? Or are there some infinite possibilities? In which case, there is enough for all. There is more than enough to go around. Mick Finn, who's on this call, always reminds us that it's interesting how we sometimes look at finite things like our time and your time on this webinar and our energy as finite. We sometimes say, well, as infinite. Sorry, we treat the finite things as though they are infinite. Don't worry, I'll waste our time tomorrow. I'll bug you again. I'll do that course next week. I'll focus on my health on January the 1st. We treat the finite things as though they're infinite. And yet the infinite things, maybe like love and courage, feedback, generosity, praise, affirmation. Sometimes we hold on to those things and treat them as though they are finite. And I was inspired by the story of a remarkable young Malian immigrant by the name of Mamadou Gassama, who is in Paris, France, and he's on his way to a football match. And he notices down the street, there's a commotion. There's people hooting and shouting, and there's all sorts of things going on. Police are starting to arrive. There's an ambulance arriving, and he looks up to the 4th floor balcony of this apartment block. And there, hanging from its fingertips, is a 4-year-old who's hanging from the balcony. Somehow he's got on the wrong side of the balcony and he's hanging by his fingertips and does not have his strength, his own strength to pull himself up. It's surely a matter of time before this 4-year-old falls. And in this most extraordinary act of almost like a Spider-Man-esque parkour, Mamadou Gassama scales the outside of this apartment building with the most incredible strength. And from street to sheet takes 36 seconds. And it really, for me, was this infinite concept of courage, that it might only take 36 seconds, but in that 36 seconds, he saves the life of this child. He meets President Macron. President Macron gives him freedom of the city, just about, a French citizenship, and a job as a fireman, which is an obvious occupation for somebody who doesn't even need the ladders. And then when he's asked why he did it, he said it's just because he loves children and he would hate to see anybody getting hurt. Now, in a world which has been frowned or has frowned upon immigrants for a long time, I wonder if the parents of that child now have a very different view of immigrants, and that an immigrant may be there to rescue your child or quietly check your pulse. And so these stories started to emerge for me in this journey. And so what I try to do is capture them to illustrate that there are times when the world is finite, and therefore we should treat those things with great stewardship. But there are also opportunities where things are infinite, and that means that we might get higher levels of generosity. If anybody's in financial management, the answer is yes, money is finite, but maybe what we do with it could give us some infinite possibilities. Do we create investments for our future? Yes. Do we live in the now and create memories? Well, maybe yes too. And if we're only on one side of the polarity, we never get to the ultimate thought, which is of choice. And as we've always said on our Leading with Humanity programs, leadership is a choice. And maybe when we look through two sets of lenses, we can choose better our own responses along our own journey. This one is a well-debated one, and I've still struggled to find out who actually said this, but it is attributed to Einstein, but I've never really nailed it. And it says one of the biggest, or whoever said it, said one of the biggest decisions we make in our life is whether we see the world as friendly or whether we see the world as unfriendly. Where do we find our balance along that set of parameters or along that particular polarity? Some of you will remember the most horrendous bomb blast that happened in Beirut not too long ago, probably 5, 6, 7 months ago. And it really flattened most of that city. 300,000 people rendered homeless, destroyed the entire harbor, and was the most shocking explosion that had happened. And in amongst this unbelievably unfriendly scene is the sound of a piano being played by a 79-year-old grandmother who has lived in Beirut almost all her life and has been through the civil war and the Syrian occupation. And her 60-year-old piano survives this attack, and she can do no better than start to play music on her piano while there's destruction all around her. And of all things, she's playing Auld Lang Syne, that wonderful, I think it was Robert Burns, who talks about a cup of kindness, and that maybe we needed a cup of kindness at this time. And so there was a picture in this unfriendly world of an incredibly friendly situation. And again, I think those of you that have come with us, and many of you hopefully will join us again, but we look at certain areas within our own country of South Africa and we say, don't go there. That's a very unfriendly place. Until we go to Wiseman's Car Wash and we are greeted with the most extraordinary hospitality. We're greeted as if we have been there all our lives. We've come out from Denmark and Finland, and we go into KwaMashu, and it's supposedly an unfriendly place, and yet we are treated with the most extraordinary hospitality. And you can't help but leave that place with a fresh set of lenses and a new perspective. And so these are all illustrated by various stories in the book. I think another one that really has stood out for us is, do we see the world as superior and inferior, or are we all unique? And of course, if we see the world as superior or inferior, it means we've always got to win. We're always in competition. We've got to prove ourselves. And yes, is it true that at the moment, South African rugby, Chad, I hate to say this, but we are the world champions and New Zealand is not. But if that was the only lens, then we would never have the extraordinary relationships that have developed because of the sport of rugby between New Zealand and South Africa for over 100 years. And so are we unique, in which case we've all got something to offer, or are we superior, inferior? Both are right. Sometimes we are superior at tennis, or a superior cook, or certainly in my case, a superior eater. But really it's about the uniqueness. And when we look at life through that lens, we are able to get better integration and certainly start to value this extraordinary thing called diversity. We will never really see the value of diversity if we only look at the world through a lens of superior or inferior. But the minute we can put the lens of some uniqueness on, maybe they've got a point, maybe they've got a history, maybe they've got an experience or an idea that I have not thought about. And when we do that, we get much higher levels of integration and certainly diversity and inclusion. I think, I'm not sure if Craig Kanyemba has managed to join us on this call, but some of you will know the story well. During lockdown, our doorbell rang in Johannesburg. And when the doorbell rings during a hard lockdown, it's not one of your friends. It's somebody that's generally looking for food or begging for something, because we're not allowed out of our houses. And so I answered this doorbell, and there was this young voice saying, "I'm here to sell some books." And immediately my perception was, he's here to really look for money, and they may be religious books, but I'm not in the market for these books. But there was something in his voice which just intrigued me. And then I saw on the security camera, he was beautifully dressed in a white shirt and a black tie. And I went down to the gate and we engaged in a conversation. And Craig Kanyemba at the time was 23 years old, and he's crossed the Limpopo River from Zimbabwe to come and make a better life for himself in South Africa. He's studying at UNISA, he's studying computer sciences, and in order to put himself through his studies, he has written 6 of his own books. That was a trigger for me to write my own book, and now I've written 1. And Craig, at the age of 23, became my mentor in the writing of my book. We sat at coffee shops together. And when I asked him, should this be a book with a story or just a book of stories? His answer was predictably yes. And so what emerged was that the book has a story, but it is also a collection of stories. And so the hope is that if you ever get a copy, it's an easy book to pick up and read a story and put down and reflect on, what is the story telling us? What are the questions that emerge from the particular story? And in the words of the beautiful poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, says, we should live our questions now. We should live our questions now. And then someday, maybe far into the future, without even realizing it, we will live ourselves into our own answers. Live our questions now. And then someday, maybe far into the future, without even realizing it, we will live ourselves into our own answers. And so if this book or any of the stories in the book inspire some questions rather than answers, then I think we're all on the right page. A 5th picture, just to move through them before we take any questions, comments, and we'd really love to make this interactive in the time that we have left. So please, by all means, pop something up onto the chat group. At the moment, I can't see what the chat group is saying, but very soon I'll come off slides. and then we'll be able to see more and more reactions. Do we live in a world that's infinitely connected, or possibly we are separate and disconnected? And again, if our picture is that we are separate and disconnected, we form silos in our business. We have regional competitions against each other. We have internal competition that keeps things separate and disconnected, divide and conquer, control and command. We keep things separate away from others. We withhold information if that's our view. But if the world is infinitely connected, then maybe there are other opportunities to think differently. You know, all the stories so far have really been stories about human beings. But even as we know, when we go trekking in the wilderness, this idea of a connected world seems to hit us softly, maybe like a ton of feathers. But on one particular afternoon, there was a commotion in the camp of Pinda. And again, those of you that have been there, maybe even some of you were at this particular experience. A hyena had got itself into the bathrooms. And that can be quite a challenging experience. We are certainly not equipped to get hyenas out of bathrooms. And so the local vet was called, and he arrived with his dart gun and he darted this hyena. And of course, all classes and all sessions stopped for the day while we watched Mike Toft, the vet at Pinda Game Reserve in KwaZulu-Natal, stitch together and repair this hyena. He'd been involved in a clan fight. And we asked him what his chances were of survival. And he said 50-50. He's got a 50-50 chance of survival. And we said, Mike, is that because you're worried about your own skill of patching him? He says, no. Physically, this hyena is absolutely fine. The biggest issue, though, that this hyena has got is that he has lost his community. Whew. And it really again struck us to think about who is our community. And are we connected to our community? Or are we, to some degree, still separate and disconnected, either from title or from perception? The last of the 6 pictures that I explore is whether we think energy and influence get things done, or are we still fixated that power gets things done? Both are true. Power and authority can get things done. And if you are lucky to fly in an aeroplane soon and go to a wonderful destination in the Indian Ocean, hopefully, you know, you would want your pilot to lead that plane with some degree of power and authority. And if there's a crisis, by all means, hand over the power and authority to those in charge and those who are qualified and those who have the command and control and authority to do so. And boy, will we all follow instructions. It's unlikely that in a crisis, the pilot will ask you how your energy is, or is there anyone else who may influence this particular landing? What are your thoughts? Let's get some collaboration. Let's get diplomatic. There's going to be time when your child is crossing the road, and there's a time to rugby tackle your child off the road. Use the power and authority that you have. But so often our world has relied, I think, on power and authority, and has forgotten the absolute essence of energy and influence. And in the book, I explore some incredible characters who we meet regularly, who have no power and no authority. And the obvious, candidates to talk around on a global scale would be someone like Mahatma Gandhi, but, lots has been written about Gandhi. It's the everyday heroes who we can really learn from. Blessing in Bombay, who teaches young children how to play chess. She has no power or authority. She has no title in the community. She simply has used her energy and influence to create a better world. At the Wanderers Golf Club is an extraordinary character called Aaron. Aaron is a caddy there. He's been a caddy there for over 40 years. When he was 2 years old, he lost one hand and all but 2 of fingers on his other hand in a Primus stove explosion, which caused a shack fire. His mother disappeared from the scene immediately. He never saw her again. And his father looked after him for the next 14 years. And then his father passed away. Aaron arrived at the Wanderers golf course as a caddy. And he has managed somehow to carry his high fives in his heart and his handshakes in his smile. And has no power or authority, and yet has the most incredible energy and influence to get you to really enjoy a game of golf. He plays off a 14 handicap with only 2 fingers on one hand, and is an example amongst many others of just the most extraordinary energy and influence. And so we look around, and you know, our world is populated with just the most magnificent stories of people that have taken the opportunity or made the opportunity to at least look through life, or look at life through another set of lenses. And when they do, they are able better to examine the world around them and to make better choices. I think the right-hand side, the red of tension, was a world I grew up in. What we refer to here in South Africa as the old South Africa was a world prior to 1994. It was a world of apartheid. It was a world where there was a single truth called apartheid. It was a world where things were very finite and linear, and only a very few people got to enjoy the resources. It was certainly an unfriendly world. Rules, absolute curfews for most of this country. We think curfews during lockdown is a new thing. Most of our population lived under serious lockdown, and there was no virus. It was just a mindset called apartheid. Unfriendly world of beatings, of trial detentions without trials, people spending months, if not years, in solitary confinement for crimes they never committed, or for crimes that today's Constitution Court are questioning whether the law was even correct at the time. It was a time where a massive picture was about superior versus inferior. And white was right. That was what it was. Separate and disconnected meant that people lived in different areas in our country by race. And you weren't allowed, unless you had a permit or a dompas or a passport, to work and live and travel in certain other areas or suburbs. And it was certainly a world that was not afraid to use power. Top-down, military, highly policed, command and control, hierarchical, and power-based system. And it was on the extreme side of that spectrum. I think that what's happened, certainly in my lifetime, is that the other half of my life has been spent in a country that is at least trying to say, well, there may be multiple truths. There are some things that may be infinite. There are places and people that were deemed as unfriendly that are quite the most extraordinarily friendly people and places one could ever go to. It is a world now celebrating a lot more of its uniqueness. And that uniqueness is enshrined in our new constitution, which is a move away from superior versus inferior. It is certainly a world where we're seeing far more connection than the separate areas act which we lived under. And it is certainly a world that is valuing more the energy and influence and challenging the structures of power. Even the ANC Youth League today is starting to challenge the power of the ANC as a whole. Now, where that goes, who knows? But it is at least the opportunity to look through another set of lenses. I won't leave my contact details up there. You all know how to get hold of me. I'd love to come off share. Maybe there's been a few thoughts or questions in the chat group, Nix, I don't know, but you can certainly read them out for me. I'd love to hear from all of you in the last sort of few minutes that we have available. And, you know, I was just astounded, you know, last night, because these stories are always around us if we choose to look for them, if we choose to listen for them. And I had a beer at the local brewery here at St. Francis Bay with a friend who has been a friend for 45 years. We were at grade 0 together. And Warren and his family were driving through South Africa, and with a few kilometers to go, he noticed this terrible noise coming from his car, which he thought, but it was actually from his trailer. He was lucky to get into a small town called Hofmeyer, and he pulled up, and as he did so, a local farmer pulled up next to him and said, "I hear your trailer is in trouble. Please, you need to stop. If you drive 10 or 15 more kilometers, you may flip that trailer and it may even flip your car. Your bearings have gone." Warren was deeply relieved to at least stop the car, and he said, "Look, please take your family into the coffee shop here." And his wife organized them a meal. And they said he got out of the coffee shop half an hour later. There were 4 farmers from the area, and one of them had brought a spare trailer and said, "We've tried to fix the bearings on your wheels, but unfortunately we've got the wrong bearings. But please, will you take our trailer from Hofmeyer to your destination?" Now, that's an 800-kilometer round trip. And I wonder who would be prepared to give up their trailer, which is an expensive thing. It's usually between 12 and 20,000 rands worth of equipment, to a complete stranger. And what are the lenses that those guys are looking through to say, all you have to do is pay for the bearings, and on your return, we will have it fixed for you. It may be that Warren, if he was the sort of person, he may never go back through that town again, and he's got himself a brand new trailer. I mean, who knows? But when you look for these stories, they are around. And I think what I hope is that in the book, you'll enjoy reading those reflective stories, which will always have some questions attached. So really enough from me now in the last few minutes. Nix, I don't know if there are any questions that have emerged or any comments. Maybe somebody would love to come off mute and share a thought. Pete, you've got your hand up, have you?
Yeah, so Steve, we've got 2 questions, which I'll quickly just throw out there. Hugh Finn asks, would you agree that blue is more typically feminine attribute and red a more typically male attribute? And we are only really beginning to recognize that both are in us as humans now, a more multiple truth.
Yeah, Hugh, wow, that's, I think it's a fabulous perspective. I think it would, for me personally, be dangerous to get into, particular genders, but absolutely, I think there is a more generous, a softer, a more abundant approach with a blue set of lenses. And I think you're right. I think that's often attributed to a more feminine perspective. Is one right and one wrong? No, but have we tended to err too much on the red? I believe we have, and because primarily it has been a largely male-dominated society where there's a single version of the truth, because in Afrikaans we say pa sê so, dad says. It's been challenged now, definitely, even by my teenage daughter and my teenage son. So yes, Hugh, I think absolutely, should we be leaning a little more, in my opinion, for sure. And is there an absolute desperate need for more women leadership? Completely. I think our world, the get that we've got, because of the do's we've done, because of the C's we've seen, has not been sustainable. And we definitely need that other set of lenses, which most women have more abundantly and more naturally, I think, than most men. I hope that maybe I'm just in agreement with you, Hugh, but it's certainly a strong point of view. And I think that when we're starting to see more of that style of leadership, then I think we're going to start to see very different outcomes. And I'm incredibly excited about that. It's going to be challenging for me as a man in a leadership role, but it's going to require me to put on a different set of lenses to see that. Yeah. Thanks, Pete. Was there another question?
There is another question from Rob Broster, who asks, I notice that you emphasize that on these polarities, both sides are valid. However, when you speak through them, you're clearly saying that the world is stuck to an extent on the wrong side, i.e. red. Would you like to help people see more of the blue? Would you like to see people to see more of the blue? In what ways do you see the red side as good or right?
So I think, Rob, yeah, great question. I mean, sometimes, as I mentioned, an example of, somebody who has the right authority, who's going to give instructions. It's a crisis. It could be a pilot. It could be a paramedic. They're going to take control, and they're not going to delve too much around the blue and getting energy and influence. They're probably going to say, steps 1, 2, and 3, we just have to do right now. There's just no question about it. If you've got a toddler and you've got a swimming pool, we should use the power and authority we've got to put up a swimming pool fence or some degree of cover on the pool. But the job doesn't stop there. The job then is to teach the children how to swim, because that's much more around energy and influence, and not about only power. The power and authority is there because the fence is up. Well, we know that people find interesting and innovative ways to get through the fences that we put up. And so there's an example where sometimes it's necessary to use power and authority on a teenager. But how quickly can we move back into a world of blue and more understanding and more growth and more development and more questioning and more coaching, as opposed to top down? I think another example is finite resources, Rob. Sometimes my time is finite and we should treat it as finite. We don't have limitless time on this earth. There's a great friend and colleague, Grant Ashfield, who always reminds me that there is less time than we think. And so when we look at the finiteness of time, we should really be great stewards of that resource, that we shouldn't be wasting our time. We shouldn't be investing our time in things that are not giving us a return, or investing in things that are not us. That is a finite. Our lives are finite. So on that side of the spectrum, it's good to have that set of lenses. But do we treat everything as finite? Maybe not. Again, I think, Rob, I'm going on a bit here, but I'm thinking through my experience with my own teenage daughter. If I am only on one side of the spectrum and I tell her that the world is only friendly, my girl, come back when you want, dress how you like, wear what you like. There'll always be somebody to tuck you in at night, and no one will ever spike your drinks. I'm erring too far on the friendly. I need her to also understand, and she will understand, that the world is sometimes unfriendly. And therefore, it's a good realization. Don't live there for too long. Don't dwell there, because if you only dwell in a world that is unfriendly, well, you'll never go out, you'll never have relationships, you'll never learn to drive a car, you'll never even buy something from the local store, because who can trust anyone? But she will need to find her balance between those polarities. So I'm not saying we always go to the extreme. I think the extremes are there for a reason. We can't sit on the tightrope on the extreme. It's somewhere in the middle that we find that. But her view of unfriendly and friendly, and her balance may be slightly different to mine, depending on circumstance, age, its situation, etc. So again, Rob, I hope that sort of answers, or at least maybe even poses more questions for you in that one.
Steve, one last question from Sam Braithwaite. What advice would you have to counterbalance a tendency to maybe over-apply the multiple view, i.e. paranoia?
Gee, Sam, great question. It's a tricky one to get towards the end of the webinar. I think, again, Sam, it may be just around some awareness. Where are we getting stuck where we cannot make a decision because there are so many multiple truths? So at a point in time, and that's going to vary, I guess, from person to person, and certainly in the book from experience to experience. But at a point in time, we need to make a choice. We need to put pen to paper. There are 100 books to write. And sometimes we don't write the book because we've got 99 of them that are still going around in our minds. And I think that comes with good, I mean, I know that on this particular webinar, we have the most qualified and quite extraordinary coaches. And I think that a coaching point of view will allow people to look through multiple choices, but start to enable them to funnel those choices into real actions. And those real actions may be a single truth that emerge out of a multiple set of variables. We get stuck, we get muddled. It's like spaghetti in our minds. And great coaches, Sam, of which your mum is one, will be able to really help people answer their own questions, but through a process of refining down all the multiple choices that we have. So yeah, I think you're right. We can get muddled and lost because there are so many multiple versions of the truth. I think it's often a process of what gives me energy. What is it that charges my batteries? And let me start that process of taking more decisive and disciplined decisions along that route. But Sam, that's certainly subject for another coffee, and I look forward to meeting up. Pete, I think over to you because we've got an important announcement. I would just like to say thank you to everybody for your attendance. I would just love to spend hours just kind of reminiscing around many of the experiences we've had. And thank you to all of you for your time and energy. It's been a wonderful opportunity to share with you all. Thanks for coming.